What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. Ian Cummings here with my fellow NFL draft analyst, A.J. Schulte. Last week, we were going over some combine review. Now free agency is hitting, and it's hitting at 100 miles per hour. Usually, A.J., I remember last year, or maybe it was the year before, we had to wait a couple days for some of the big signings to play through. You know, it's like, all right, building the anticipation. What's happening here? Like, hey, when's it going to happen? This year, right off the bat, man, I mean, some really big signings on the very first day of free agency. Kirk Cousins to the Atlanta Falcons, Christian Wilkins to the Las Vegas Raiders, Brian Burns traded to the New York Giants from the Carolina Panthers, and so many more, too. They really got off to a fast start. And today, we're going to talk about some of those bigger signings and how they might impact the 2024 NFL Draft, the implications there. But first off, AJ, checking in. It's been a week. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing pretty well. It's been a busy week. Yesterday was pretty busy because it felt like something was announced like every 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. I have like a notification for the transaction wires and things like that. And there was one point where it vibrated. So much had gotten sent in at one point that I thought my phone was going to vibrate off of my desk. So that was an interesting experience because my mom was like, "What in the world is going on? Like, who's blowing up your phone?"
It's the NFL,
like, "It's just the NFL.
It's the NFL.
It's my job." But isn't it funny how all of these contracts can get hammered out within a few minutes of being able to legally tamper with these guys?
I know, man. These guys, they come prepared, man. I swear. Yeah.
They are so ready. These guys are such savvy businessmen, aren't they? They just, boom, they have it ready to go. And they're like, "You're going to agree to this? Perfect. Awesome."
No, man, the legal tamper, every year the phrase legal tampering is just so funny. It's like, man, come on. It's the worst kept secret. Like, we know these guys talk.
Like, there's a term. I know there's a word for it, but it's such a legal, like a funny legal irony to me that it's like Roger Goodell and I guess all the NFL executives and enforcement is just sitting there going, it's like a paradox, right? Legal tampering. Isn't tampering like not illegal?
Yeah, isn't it supposed to be illegal? I don't get it. Oh my goodness.
But it's just it's very funny, but you know what? It creates so much content.
Yeah.
Like we're here. They were talking, the over the cap guys were talking about how a few years ago when they started doing like television for talking about free agency, they set it for Wednesday, and all the moves had been announced Monday and Tuesday, so they had like nothing to talk about on Wednesday. And so it's such a funny irony. But we had so much hit yesterday. It was crazy.
And, you know, I do like that we don't have to wait as long, right? You know, like, and that was a good thing for this podcast too, because I was a little worried yesterday because we were going to go as scheduled. Are we going to have enough to talk about? Is it going to be a slow burn like 2022 or 2023? No, man. They're right off the bat, just like 5 moves, you know, bang, bang, bang. So it's been a fun one already. And we're going to try and keep an ear to it during this podcast, but things have started to slow down a little bit now after the first wave, I think, and we can definitely have more than enough to talk about. So I feel like the first one for 2024 NFL draft implications, Kirk Cousins. We know where he's playing now. There was some speculation. The Minnesota Vikings were still in the hunt to maybe retain him, right? But they also weren't going to go past a certain point with guarantees, right? They were willing to walk away at a certain price. And I think the Atlanta Falcons hit that price. What was the guarantee number for them? It was over $60 million, right? They signed him to a long-term deal. 35-36 coming off a torn Achilles. It's a trepidatious venture for sure. But before his injury last year, Kirk Cousins was playing at a very high level. And you insert him into an offense where he has schematic familiarity, good offensive line, fairly good weapons, add another wide receiver, and they'll be set. And the defense has got a lot of talent too. So I think it's a really good situation for him. What does it mean for the Falcons? They got the number 8 pick now. They could trade down maybe, but then also, you know, one QB suitor is off the board, and another QB suitor, the Minnesota Vikings at 11, they really need a quarterback now. So that's the biggest move implication wise to me. How'd you kind of see that?
Yeah, it's definitely, so the official number is 4 years, $180 million.
That's a bag right
with
there.
$100 million in guarantees. His 2024 and 2025 salaries are fully guaranteed, and he got a $50 million signing bonus that is from over the cap. And like that's a ton of money. Like you said, like it's obviously it's a great spot for him. I think the Falcons just desperately needed, and you're kind of hoping that he can be a little bit like Matt Ryan in terms of just being like a veteran, stable presence in the quarterback room. he's not going to be a superstar, but what Kirk Cousins has done the last 2 years, I think, has been probably his best football of his career.
For sure.
And if Zach Robinson is as good as we think he is, I think Zach Robinson, coming from that Sean McVay tree, has steadily risen up the ranks, I think, and now it adds a little bit of intrigue to that offense and just what it can look like. But you got Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier at running back. That offensive line, I think, really stabilized last year. Chris Lindstrom is one of the best guards in the NFL. Matt Bergeron played well last year as well. Kyle Pitts I bet you he is thrilled. I bet you Kyle Pitts is like, I can finally get a target that is like within 15 yards of me. He's so excited about that. He's going to go off this year. Drake London, I think, like, everybody in that Falcons offense should be better. Mm-hmm. And that's like, you really just needed that kind of, like, Kirk Cousins won't wow you. I don't know if he'll be like a superstar who's going to put up 40 touchdowns a year or anything, but my gosh, he'll keep you on schedule and he'll keep that offense humming.
And I'll add too, I think last year before he got injured, as evaluators, we talk about the physical talent, right? And like, he's obviously got enough arm to stick in the league this long. But I think for Kirk Cousins, especially before the injury last year, some of his 2023 tape was an absolute clinic on the soft skills of QB play, like staying in the pocket, staying poised, staying on schedule, and standing tall while delivering, tight window throws, accurate, willing to, he's got good risk propensity too, where he's not going to force bad throws, but he'll give you a chance in 50-50 situations. Just a lot of those things that, you go back to a guy like Desmond Ridder, a little shaky in the pocket, right? The mechanics are wonky a lot, the inaccuracy, right? I feel like that in and of itself is going to be a big facelift for an offense that really was just craving any sort of stable operation last year. They finally have that.
With Ridder, it was like he would make a good play, and then 3 plays later, he commits just like an ungodly level fumble or interception, or it's 3rd and 3 and he panics in the pocket and throws the ball away. And it's just like, you just can't keep the offense moving like that. And this year, like, if they didn't go with Kirk Cousins, who would Atlanta have gone with? I think that was the biggest question, and why we had said like they were going to be aggressive for a quarterback, and they sure were. I mean, that is quite literally as close to a blank check as you'll get for Kirk Cousins. No pun intended. But it's really just, I think with Atlanta now, you can really just pick your best player available.
For sure.
Right? You want to take Neighbors or Odunze if they're there. Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Dallas Turner makes a lot of sense as well. They're missing that dynamic pass rusher. But now you could really just afford to go best player available. And if Minnesota or somebody gets aggressive for a quarterback and you want to trade down, you have that option now too, because you don't have that many, like, you don't have that huge hole at quarterback. And you can still find another talented wide receiver in this draft class. Lord knows there's like 30 of them this year. You could really just afford to play the draft board, which is, I think, all you can ask for if you're Atlanta, where you're in kind of that weird situation of, we're not saying they're outright like top tier Super Bowl contenders, but they're definitely not going to be bottom of the division.
Yeah, for sure.
I think just adding picks and adding talent where you can is a smart strategy, and now they can afford to do so.
Yeah, and I think the NFC South is a very opportunistic division for Cousins to join with the Falcons. I mean, the Buccaneers, they re-signed Baker Mayfield, they add some edge talent, they re-up the cornerback room. Like, I think they can compete again next year, but they have some holes on the offensive line too. I think the Atlanta Falcons, now that they've gotten Cousins, are pretty safely the most complete team in the division. Carolina still has work to do to support Bryce Young. So that in and of itself is an opportunity. And you go back to the draft board for them, number 8 overall. Like you said, if Malik Neighbors is there, I would love that fit, not just with Drake London and with Kirk Cousins, but in that offense, that McVay style offense, scheming him touches, right? But he can also extend beyond his frame and snare passes, in contested situations that Cousins is willing to test, right? And the rack threat that he provides is incredible too. So I would absolutely love that fit, that explosive powder keg to finish, complete that wide receiver group. Would be very exciting. But then if you want to trade back too, right? I mean, because especially the edge group in this class, like Dallas Turner is a fringe top 10 guy. Like I would really be willing to pick him there. But you've also got Jared Verse, Latu, Chop Robinson. Odds are one of those guys is going to be there in the late teens. So if you want to trade back, get some capital, and still get one of those guys, like adding Jared Verse to that defense and extra capital, that's not something I'm going to shrug at.
It's tough to pass on. Yeah.
That's a very good proposition. So the Falcons right now, I think the biggest question for you is, can Kirk Cousins get back to the level that he was playing at pre-injury? I think as long as he gets back to 100%, he can, because he's in a very good offensive structure for him. It's just that's the question that's looming over our heads, and we can't answer it until we see him on the field in a Falcons uniform, unfortunately. But there is room to be optimistic. Now, on the other side of the trade, you've got the Minnesota Vikings, 11th overall. They signed Sam Darnold from the 49ers. There's been some tepid optimism around Darnold and his potential, playing in San Francisco for a little bit, hoping he kind of gleaned some information, some growth from that situation, but very much an unknown right now. Probably best to bank on as a backup, right? So if you're Minnesota, 11th overall, you're not in a great position to get a QB, but we've been feeling for a while they're going to be aggressive if an opportunity arises. What do they do? What's the best case scenario for them? I've been feeling J.J. McCarthy at number 5 to the Chargers. That's a pretty prime trade back position for the Chargers, right? If the Vikings want to trade up there. But we've also been, hearing rumors, right, that, the Patriots, if they like Jaden Daniels a lot, right, like they might trade down from 3 if he's not there. That would be, to me, that would be kind of absurd, because Drake May is my QB1. I don't really see, I think there's some prospect fatigue there just from my perspective. But if that does happen, if Drake May is somehow available at that point, you have to sell the farm for him. I think if you're Minnesota, I mean, what are the dynamics of that decision for them now going after a QB in round 1?
Yeah, it's not the greatest spot to be in. Mm-hmm. I'll say that because you're picking at such a weird spot. And with the Chargers, I think they want, they are signaling they're going to run the ball and then run the ball some more and continue to do so until morale improves. Mm-hmm. That's their whole shtick. And if you're the Chargers, they really love Joe Alt. They're not hiding it. It's not a secret. They love Joe Alt and what he does, and they're going to stick it in. And how do they play that? Because he won't be there at 11 if you trade back. Right? Do you trade back for and basically lose out on him, and you probably lose out on Fuaga because the Jets are right there at 10, mm-hmm. unless you want to parlay a move up and around, which just seems a little too complicated to me. If you just probably just take him at 5, mm-hmm. which if that's the case and the Chargers stay there at 5 and just say, sorry, Minnesota, you're SOL, we're not helping you out. The Giants are right there at 6, and they are not hiding that they want a quarterback. Mm-hmm. They've made it known that they're interested in Jameis Winston. They were talking to Tyrod Taylor, and now if they don't land either of those, if they didn't land Tyrod Taylor, he signed with the Jets. But if they don't land Winston and they just pass on it till the draft, what does that say about their strategy at 6? They probably want a quarterback.
And here's the thing with the Giants too, trading for Brian Burns, that's a win now move. You don't want to make that move and stick with Daniel Jones and he stalls out and then you're stuck resetting again, right? So you have to be aggressive in getting some type of guy that you can at least feel comfortable with in the next couple of years. And it's it's not a move you make and then stall out. That's for sure.
Yeah. And that's the thing with Minnesota is you're now kind of you're kind of stuck. Mm-hmm. You're basically hoping that teams don't like J.J. McCarthy. We'll see. I think Sam Darnold is more just a move of, well, if we can't get a quarterback, we're going to see what he can do.
Yeah.
Right. If he plays well, great. He's cheap. We can bring him back. No problem. If he doesn't, we'll probably be bad enough anyways that we go get a quarterback next year and just reset. They're probably just kind of aiming to just wipe the slate clean in 2024 and play for 2025, which is a difficult strategy, I think, because the ownership has made it very public that they want to compete like the Steelers and just be involved every single year, which you can't do if you don't have Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
But they weren't willing to go there for Kirk Cousins. And to that to $180 million. It's like, yeah, I get the price tag. It might be a lot for a lot of owners, but it's they're in a weird spot right now because there's no real easy solutions for them. Maybe they trade back from 11 and like they kind of just recoup some draft picks and maybe take a premier defensive player, draft Bo Nix or Michael Penix or somebody later on, and just have him compete with Darnold and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's no easy, surefire solutions for them. And they're basically beholden to other teams right now, because if the Chargers say no, if the Giants take a quarterback, if these teams keep saying, no, that's not a good enough deal for us, it's Darnold or bust right now.
And I'm glad you brought up Penix too, because I think for the Vikings, the one thing is clear. They don't hold the cards. Other teams hold the cards. However the board falls, if the Patriots for some reason don't like Drake May and are open to trading down, if Jaden Daniels is the pick at 2, the Patriots hold the cards, right? So you've got the Giants, you've got the Broncos, the Raiders, you've got multiple QB needy teams that are competing for that capital. And in particular, the Giants at 6 are in a much better spot than the Vikings are. The Vikings, to close that gap, would have to offer an insane amount of capital, right? Like you would have to sell the farm. Now, is the QB worth being that aggressive for? That's the other part of this equation, because you don't want to just trade up to 5 to get JJ McCarthy just to get a quarterback, right? Like you have to feel that good about JJ McCarthy. And if you don't, it's a tale as old as time. We've seen teams be aggressive for guys who have upside, but at the end of the day, didn't have a strong enough profile, and the team didn't have the supporting cast to properly acclimate that. So, it's a tale as old as time. You don't want to trade up to 5 for a guy who's not quite worth that pick, because that's how guys can flame out. It's a dangerous gamble. It really is. And so if you're the Vikings, you have to ask some tough questions like, hey, we like the upside with JJ McCarthy, but is he a guy we would spend this much to get at number 5? Because we're going to have to outbid a couple teams who will probably be trying to get to that point too. So that's a big thing. If you trade back, get Michael Penix, right? Are you comfortable rolling with Penix? Are you comfortable doing that? Because if you spend an early pick on him and he turns out to not be the guy, that's capital that you could have spent on supporting talent too, and you're resetting a QB either way. I think the Darnold move gives them a good safety blanket, right? It doesn't force them into a corner. And it's very interesting to me, just from an exterior perspective, because Baker Mayfield, right? Started his career with the Browns, then went to the Panthers, the Rams, looked like he was pretty much going to flame out as a backup almost, right? And then he goes to Tampa Bay and completely reinvents his game and ends up making the Pro Bowl, right? And now he gets extended 3 years. Geno Smith started with the Jets, was a backup for a long time, then came to Seattle and became a arguable top 12 quarterback, right? So guys can remake themselves. It's not something you see happen often, but it's also not impossible. And so you look at a guy like Darnold, hey, worst comes to worst, we're comfortable giving him a shot, right? Seeing how it goes. If it doesn't go well, like you said, you can pick another guy in 2025. I think that signing at the very least allows them to not be worked into a corner. And that's the most important thing, because when you're worked into a corner, that's when you make that move from 11 to 5 for a guy who's a good, not great prospect. And that can limit you just as much. So it's going to be fascinating to see what the Vikings do in that quarterback situation. But hey, I think for the most part, I think the Vikings have done a really good job. Beyond that too, they just signed Aaron Jones earlier today at running back. I think that's really good. Now you can spend early capital in other positions. Jonathan Greenard from the Texans had a really good year last year. Andrew Van Ginkel from the Miami Dolphins as well. Blake Cashman, also from the Texans. I believe he signed with the Vikings at linebacker. So they've been making a lot of good moves. I think for the situation they're in right now, this is how you want to play it. You want to make prudent free agency acquisitions, not break the bank for any one guy, and then get a guy like Darnold who, hey, in the right situation, maybe he can be a nice buy low bargain. Maybe you get more than you bargained for. And so I think that's the biggest thing, not forcing any one situation. But looking at the Falcons at number 8, who are some other teams that could maybe trade up to that point for you? Because we got the Las Vegas Raiders. They signed Gardner Minshew, and we've got the and then also the Patriots as well. They signed Jacoby Brissett. Does that impact their QB situation at all? I think we were both agreeing no, but we can circle back on that. But you got the Raiders. They signed Gardner Minshew. You got the Broncos, who really only have Jarrett Stidham, right? Those are probably the top 2 teams that would also be in contention for that 8th pick, right?
Yeah, I think Denver was trying to land Darnold.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of came out, and they were making it like no secret that they wanted Darnold, which is why the Vikings, I think, ultimately opened the bank because they just didn't want to, like you said, get backed into a corner.
Yeah.
And not have any options, right? You're not going to run out there with Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall and think you're going to be competitive. Now, if you're Denver, I feel like now this is that they're going to trade back and take like Knicks or somebody like that, just because you're basically out of the mark. And you don't want another big quarterback contract, right? You're trying to clear some of this cap and kind of start over. And you need talent on both sides of the ball. I don't think they're quite as far away as other people are making them out to be, but they definitely need an influx of talent and accumulate picks. And they just kind of need a quarterback that can keep them afloat for next year. And I think that's all you can really ask Bo Nix to do. For other teams, the Raiders, I don't know, man. I have no idea what's going on there because their offensive moves are odd, but their defensive moves are great. Christian Wilkins is a fantastic signing. That's awesome with Max Crosby. I think he can also help Tyree Wilson's development out a lot, just taking some pressure away from him, drawing more blocks and kind of freeing up Wilson some. That defense is feisty as heck. I love the way those guys played at the end of last year. I think they probably add a corner at the first round. I think that's where, but like if they get a gut feeling about a guy, I wouldn't put it past them. But I think they're kind of fine with Minshew and Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, which is you have a division with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. That's quite the stark difference. But you're at 13, like you're probably not going to land any of those guys anyways.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting move for them.
It's kind of a similar situation to Minnesota where you're not in with the right real estate. So don't work yourself into a corner pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you talked about with the Patriots, I don't know how many times they can sit here and say they want to take a quarterback without saying, hey, we're taking a quarterback at 3. It just depends on who's there.
Yeah.
Like they like Gerard Mayo's like first day, he said, we want to take the best player at the most important position. And then they traded away Mac Jones and they signed Jacoby Brissett and immediately came out and said, he's a bridge quarterback for our next rookie. It's like, here's your sign, guys. Like, in case you didn't know before the combine, you know now that they are absolutely taking a quarterback this year. Whether they take him at 3, I doubt they risk it and move back at all, unless they just don't love any of those guys. Like if it is number 1 and 2, Williams and May, which I feel like is what will happen ultimately, and they don't love Jaden Daniels enough. If the Giants do, and you move back to 6, okay, you have the 6th overall pick, which you can maybe turn into J.J. McCarthy if the Vikings don't jump up to 5. And you have extra capital there, right? You come out with J.J. McCarthy in a 2nd or a 3rd or some future day 2 picks. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad move either.
Yeah.
But New England, they're definitely taking a quarterback. They're not hiding that at all. Is kind of my gut feeling there. But
and I'm actually, circling back because you mentioned the Chargers. Joe Walt seems like he'd be a great fit for them. I feel like there's, kind of brainstorming here, a scenario where the Patriots, if they don't love the guys, if they don't love Jaden Daniels at 3, say, like let's say it's Williams, May, they don't love Daniels, they can trade back to 6 for the Giants who like Daniels and want to take him, right? And then they can trade up to 5, right? So the Chargers get to stay at 6 and take Joe Walt. The Patriots get out of that situation more or less in neutral, right? You got to give up a little bit to block out the Vikings, but you can trade back up to 5 and get McCarthy. Just different ways to maneuver the board. And it's maybe a little too much work to do on draft night because there's so much going on. But it's fun to think about how you can maneuver and get that value.
Yeah, for sure. And the Patriots have always played the board. That's been one of their things. Now it is a new front office, but I doubt that'll significantly change. And then they have options. I personally, I love Jacoby Brissett. I think worst case scenario, he can operate your offense well.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw him play with this very Browns offense, or with this very same Browns offense, with their offensive coaching staff. And I don't think the Patriots are as bad as people think they are, talent-wise. I mean, this was a number one run defense last year. And
on defense, they're good. Offensively, still some work to do.
Defense, they're still good, but I think you retain Onwenu at right tackle.
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested to see how the Patriots try to swing, or if they try to swing for a left tackle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because this class, like, if you wait till your second rounder, you're kind of in that weird spot of maybe like a Kingsley Suamatea is there, maybe he's not.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to wait for that next tier of guys, like maybe Patrick Paul. But I mean, maybe he's the maybe he's the left tackle solution. I don't necessarily think he is ready.
Yeah, there's some guys in that range, Paul being one of them, where that would be too rich for me. I understand why they would consider him there, because the tools are definitely
it would be a reach,
but
it would be reaching for need.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, the Patriots just aren't ever a needs-based team.
And I don't think they're in a situation where they have to do that, because they have multiple needs. Like, if there's a wide receiver there, like let's say Keon Coleman fell to that point, like, hey, I mean, I'm going with that, honestly. You know, like, I mean,
Ladd McConkey, man.
McConkey too. Like, if he's
that's just so on the nose.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think they're still making moves at wide receiver. They're still heavily involved with Calvin Ridley, which I think is, if you add Ridley, they're definitely not going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. in the first round, like that's been pretty commonly mocked. But we'll see how that sweepstakes goes. Ultimately, I feel like if you look at like how the Patriots are handling things and how this quarterback market stacks out, it's a lot of teams are kind of like shoring up their depth right now.
Yeah, and speaking of that too, the Commanders actually topical. They just signed Marcus Mariota, so kind of following that same philosophy that we've been talking about.
I kind of wonder if they move Howell and they just say, "Hey, man, like you get a fresh start somewhere else."
I would honestly. He's a young QB. He's bound to get interest, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could get. I mean, you're not going to get a third rounder for him or anything like that, but you probably can. You can maybe swing a fifth, maybe a sixth. Like, probably just add as much capital as you can because you need it. And Howell's clearly not going to be your starter for next year, unless you just say, "Hey, we're going to punt at quarterback at 2," which probably doesn't seem like the right move in this class. But you never know with Washington. You can't count out Washington doing anything.
I feel bad for my Washington Commanders fans out there, because they've been begging for this kind of situation for a long time, man. Dan Snyder's gone. You have a pretty respectable kind of group now at the top with Adam Peters, with Dan Quinn. Come on, guys, just take Drake May. Just take Drake May. Just make
Drake
the right choice. I mean, like, hey, we don't know what's going to be the right choice. We don't know how any of these guys are going to pan out. But what we've seen on tape, right? You know, obviously, I think very much worth the investment. But I mean, we don't know what they're gonna do. It's gonna be fun to say. I was gonna say something else. What was I gonna say? I forgot for the time being. But it's the QB situations. Oh, yeah,
yapping too much.
I know, right? Like, no, me, I'm yapping too much, man. I gotta slow my brain down. I remembered it though. We're good. I remembered it in real time, which is really impressive. Heat of the moment. But one QB who's kind of been left in limbo. Before we move on from QBs, one more. Where does Justin Fields play next year, man? What happens with that? Because the Steelers were maybe posited as a potential suitor. They signed Russell Wilson, which, again, you're in QB purgatory. I'm sorry about that. It's just how it's going to go for you. But Justin Fields, there was speculation that maybe he'd command a day 2 pick, right? That's out the window now at this point, because the demand just has not been there. And the QB, the open starting spots are closing left and right too. Like, a lot of these teams that are getting veterans, they're obviously circling quarterbacks in the draft, right? So where does he go? I mean, I'm thinking about potential suitors in my mind, and it's the starting spots are closing up, and it's becoming, hey, just get him as a high tier backup in a good situation, right?
Yeah,
like that seems like it's the way to go at this point.
I'm not gonna lie. I think the first name that came to my mind was the Rams.
Behind Matthew Stafford, that would be good.
They've openly, like, they've said that they don't think Stetson Bennett is going to be around the team again this year. Like, they said they're operating like they don't have a backup quarterback right now. And they clearly want something more out of a backup if he has to come in, because they tried the Brett Rippon, like your stereotypical like backup quarterback who just is supposed to run the offense and rhythm and other platitudes like that, and it didn't work.
Yeah,
like they cut Rippon that week and signed Carson Wentz. I wouldn't rule it out. And you know what? You say Stafford only has one more year of guarantees left on his contract. And I'm not saying they should replace Matthew Stafford. That's not what I'm saying, because Matthew Stafford's awesome.
Yeah, but there's some uncertainty there, is what you're saying.
But there's definitely some uncertainties in the future. Yeah. And like, hey, if you feel like Justin Fields is your guy and you can make that situation work, why not? You just take a swing. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? The Rams have a ton of capital again this year. Like, I it's not the best scheme fit in terms of like you have to adjust, but that's why he's sitting. That's why he's behind Matthew Stafford. And at this point, if you're the Rams and you're trying to find a backup quarterback, you're probably not going to find anything better, right? There's no better worthwhile swing. So I think just Fields to the Rams makes a lot of sense.
I like that
just
one
in terms of both for them. And I think he would be, you look at what McVay did for Baker Mayfield's career in just a short amount of time. Right. I mean, like it quickly turned him around, and now he's had success with Tampa as well. And he credits a lot to his time with the Rams. It's kind of just bringing himself back. And maybe Justin Fields needs that kind of encouragement and development, and he can sit behind Stafford and learn from Stafford, who's one of the best in the NFL right now, kind of just work his confidence back. And who knows? I mean, the Rams improved the interior of their offensive line.
Yeah.
With Jonah Jackson, their right tackle, I think Havenstein is one of the best in the game. Left tackle is still kind of a unknown right now, but
Alec Jackson, he was at least serviceable last year, right?
Yeah. They'll probably still be looking to add one.
Yeah,
but I mean, you talk about throwing to Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and with that run game with Kyron Williams, like there are worse spots for Justin Fields to be in, and the more that I'm sitting here talking about it with you live on the air, the more that I'm going, yeah, I really kind of want to see this now. Like, what does this look like in a year or two?
No, I love that too.
And I think for Fields, all it is right now is just trying to find a place where you can start over.
Yeah,
right, and just kind of rebuild your confidence.
Yeah, I think that was one that I didn't really have at the front of my mind. So you talked about the Rams, like, oh, shoot, I like that, and the more you talk about it, you talk yourself into it, you talk me into it. I like that one a lot. And I think at this point, the important part to note is Mac Jones went for what? It was a 5th or a 6th, right? It was
a 6th.
It was a 6th. So, man, if he's going for a 6th at this point, there isn't a lot of demand for Fields. You probably don't have to spend more than a day 3 pick on him, right? So it's like that buy low proposition is really appealing for a guy who's so talented as a runner, has the arm talent, just needs a reset. Like you said, the Rams are a great spot. Another spot that's kind of in my mind right now, because they lost their backup QB, Gardner Minshew, is the Colts, Shane Steichen. I think that could be a really appealing proposition for Fields. Obviously won't be competing to start. They got Anthony Richardson. But I think if you're Shane Steichen, you say to Fields, hey, look, Richardson missed some time in 2023, and look how Minshew was able to play, right? Obviously, he was elevated a lot by that Steichen offense, but I think that's a selling point of your Fields, right? Like, you could play really well in this structure. You could provide that running dynamic ability, and you'd also be set up to succeed with the supporting talent you have around you. So if by chance, like, hey, A-Rich is our guy, but if you have to come in and you play well, you could generate some interest in the ensuing offseason, right? So I think that's another one.
It's much the same as with the Rams in a case of you're rebuilding his confidence.
Yeah.
And if you're Steichen, like, look at what he did with Jalen Hurts. And I mean, like, I think Justin Fields is a better thrower just in terms of like talent alone.
Yeah.
What can he do with that if he's rebuilding his confidence, right? You look, they have so much talent on that offense. Jonathan Taylor, that offensive line was awesome.
Yeah.
At Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, like they don't lack for weapons either. So I really think that would be another good fit. Just kind of like we talked about several times, just rebuild his confidence as a quarterback in a right situation with a coach that can buy in on him. I think those two spots make a lot of sense. I think that's a great one. I hadn't thought about the Colts, but now that you say it as well, I'm kind of going, yeah, no, I could see it. And just like you said, with Richardson missing time, you want a guy that can kind of keep it, add that some of that dynamic playmaking ability as well.
Mm-hmm.
So your offense doesn't just completely like lose that and kind of sputter like they did at moments with Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
Like I think that makes a ton of sense as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's I think the moral of the story is even now, the Justin Fields trade stuff is starting to stall out a little bit, but there are still options out there. And I think teams are going to be more compelled to make that move as the price deteriorates even more. That's kind of what's going to be.
And even like one last point on this, like you talked about earlier with the day 3 pick, the day 3 quarterbacks this year, like who's going to be better? Are you going to bank on like Sam Hartman or Carter Bradley with a day 3 pick? Like you might as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think the Jaguars adding Mac Jones was kind of silly, but at least with like Justin Fields, you can kind of talk yourself into, hey, we'll just see what he's got. Yeah. Right. Like there's at least some upside to that discussion.
And for the Colts too, if he has to play and plays well because you're Shane Steichen and you know how to use that type of QB and support him, right? Like you can get some capital back from that, right? With the interest that you generate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no real downside in my mind because I don't think there's any better options if you're looking for we just want a pure backup right now. But the question then becomes is that something that Justin Fields wants?
Yeah.
Which we don't know.
Yeah.
But the Bears have said they wanted to do right by him. So maybe they just send him to a good landing spot like either of these two teams we talked about.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if you want to do right by him and thinking about what Fields would want if he wants to reset, I can't think of two better offensive coordinators, offensive minds than Sean McVay and Shane Steichen. I mean, I think that's where it starts, where it ends. So I would love that for him. We got a little bit under 10 minutes left, so let's go away from the QB position indirectly. Still talking about a QB, Carolina's Bryce Young, right? Took his lumps in year one. And the Panthers have Dave Canales, really good offensive line, promising offensive mind from Tampa Bay as head coach. A lot of work to do with that offensive supporting cast, but I think they're starting to take moves in the right direction. They traded Brian Burns yesterday to the New York Giants, I think for a second rounder this year, 39th overall, and then I think a fifth rounder in 2025. So Brian Burns off to the Giants. The Carolina Panthers don't have a first rounder, but they get another pick in the top 50. And that's a big thing for this team, man. I mean, they signed two offensive guards, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, so they're shoring up that interior. I think they're going to try and experiment with Austin Corbett at guard. I would want some more interior depth behind that, but they're starting to shuffle guys around. I think the defense with Ejiro Evero still has a lot of good pieces. Obviously, you need to add an edge rusher now that Burns is gone, but there are pieces in place. I think for Bryce Young, getting that extra second rounder, especially with the wide receivers that'll be available in that window, that's a big thing for them. So thinking about the Carolina Panthers now, that extra second rounder, obviously it's only one pick, but I think without a first rounder is a really big thing for this team that's still rebuilding, that needs more talent on the offensive side of the ball. What are you kind of thinking they do with those now? That 33rd overall pick, that 39th overall pick, what's the feeling of what they can do to help Bryce Young out?
Yeah, I feel like they kind of cemented their offensive line.
Yeah.
Right. Ekwonu is still the left tackle. He took his lumps early, but I thought he really settled down well at the end of last year. And they seem pretty locked into him. Lewis is going to be left guard, and then Austin Corbett is at center, like you mentioned, and then Robert Hunt's at right guard, and Taylor Moton is at right tackle. They are not hiding that they want to run the ball and run the ball and run the ball over and over and over again. So I think the biggest thing I think for Bryce Young is now, like, I think they're switching him to be more of like a point guard role of just like, you're going to operate quick game. You're going to take those shots off of play action.
That's what he does best,
but mainly
that point guard.
Yeah. But mainly just like, he's going to just operate the offense. And then hopefully he has enough out of structure to kind of create plays when things break down. But I think for Canales, this was, I mean, granted, that's a lot of money. $100 million contract for Robert Hunt is a lot of money. The same for Damian Lewis. I don't remember his exact.
I think it was over
numbers.
10 AAV. I think it was over 10 for sure.
Yeah, it could be like they have an out where it could be like just a 2-year, $27 million deal if it fails, which I think which is smart. I think Lewis will be fine, but they're going to run the ball a ton. Like that's a big deal for them. I think that takes them out of contention. I didn't know they were going to move Corbett to center until late last night. So immediately when those signings happened, I thought they were going to take like Zach Frazier or maybe like Jackson Powers Johnson if he somehow fell there.
Yeah.
But now I think you kind of open yourselves up. That's a pass rusher and a wide receiver at those 2 picks. I think you look wide receiver, if Keon Coleman slips out, if A.D. Mitchell doesn't seem like he'll be there, but you never know. Xavier Worthy, I think, makes a ton of sense for them at 33. Just they need some kind of explosiveness on the outside. And just, I think he would be a really good weapon for Bryce Young in the quick game as well. You know, and just be able to turn ability after the catch. And then you have to take a pass rusher. Like, I think they have you and me getting ready to gear up out there at pass rusher. I mean, it's like, I think it's Amari Barno and Luigi Valjean.
They got DJ Johnson, who they drafted in round 3 last year too, but his rookie returns weren't great. So they definitely need to add that. But I mean,
it's just like Derek Brown in that front 7.
Yeah,
right
that's
now. That's pretty much.
They have a few solid veterans like Shy Tuttle, but again, I mean, he's a run. Doesn't have too much pass rush dynamic. So I think to your point, 33 and 39, like any permutation you want, right? Like Xavier Worthy and Adisa Isaac, or Jalen Polk and Darius Robinson, right? There are a lot of possibilities, and I think the board falls really well at those 2 positions in particular. So it's a great range to need those 2, and I think that's what they center on for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now if you're Carolina, like, you're just taking as much talent as you can get.
Yeah.
Right. Like this, I think this draft is just pure. Who's the best player on your board? Take them. Keep going. Right. Like, there's no the need. I think they pretty much need talent everywhere. Right. The safety spot. I think they're another sneaky spot for like Tyler Nubin. With one of those 2 picks, if he's there, because did they cut Von Bell?
Did they cut Von Bell?
Yeah, he's moving on, and then Jeremy Chin's a free agent and is leaving. So I think it's Xavier Woods and Jamie Robinson are the only 2 safeties left on roster. I could be missing somebody, but like I could see them. He's saying Evero wants that kind of guy.
Yeah,
Nubin is probably going to be one of the best players left on the board at that spot, anyways. So I think it makes a lot of sense. But I think if you're looking at those 2 picks, you're easily circling wide receiver and a defensive playmaker at the very least.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I hadn't seen the cut Von Bell, so thank you for that. I think Tyler Nubin, I would love adding him to that secondary. One of my favorite players in the draft. I think he's so sound. He's so good. He's so good, man. He's incredible. Good. But I mean, the Carolina Panthers, bottom line, it's unfortunate that you weren't able to trade Brian Burns at his peak value, right? Because you couldn't gotten so much more. But I think the new regime, they just had to bite the bullet and just like say, hey, come on, let's get this over with. Let's get some capital.
I think Burns wanted out.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think Burns would have taken a snap for them this year.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know what, just take what you can get. And now with the Giants with Brian Burns, holy smokes, dude. I mean,
Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon
Brian
Thibodeau.
Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, even a couple of the other depth guys, I think, on that interior as well. Like that defense can be good.
Yeah.
They lost Xavier McKinney, which is a pretty big loss. Hey, maybe they could be in the market for Nubin as well. Yeah. But like that front 7, that pass rush looks so good right now. Just get Dexter Lawrence some help, because Big Dex, I think, was one of the best. I think him and Chris Jones were the 2 best like non-Aaron Donald defensive linemen this year. And you add those 2 together, you add Brian Burns to that mix.
It's scary. Man. It really is. That was the biggest thing when I was looking at their depth chart. Like, you can definitely add more to the rotation alongside Dexter Lawrence, but man, that trio up front, oh man, that's a lot of fun. You got Kayvon's power, you got Brian Burns' bend and agility, and then Dexter Lawrence just being the guy who's drawing double teams and just wrecking blocks. Like, it's going to be a fun trio to watch in action. We've got around a minute left, so real quick, Jameis Winston signed with the Browns just a couple minutes ago. Yeah, so that's a fun one, man. That's a fun one. That's a good one. A couple teams that have impressed you, a couple teams that you've liked before we get out of here. The Houston Texans, I absolutely love what they're doing. Azeez Al-Shaair at linebacker, Danico Autry is that versatile defensive lineman. They lost Greenard, but I think they've gotten a lot back on the defensive side. I really love what they've been doing. That's the only one that's kind of popping into my head right now. The Texans at the top one. I think the Bills getting Daquan Jones back was really big too. What are some teams, 1 or 2, that have stood out to you as, having good moves so far?
Yeah, I think the Rams adding Jonah Jackson, Colby Parkinson, and then this morning they signed Darius Williams back.
That's a big one. He's still good.
And Williams was a huge standout for them for years. Jonah Jackson, dude, they're gonna run the ball. Like, that's gonna be the stuff of nightmares up the middle. I think that's kind of the main standout, but I also do kind of like the Jets adding, John Simpson, Terod Taylor, Javon Kinlaw as well, like just adding guys to like shore up your depth. And John Simpson, I think, can be a starter at left guard, and upgrade over Tomlinson from last year. Just again, you're just trying to establish talent around Aaron Rodgers and keep him as healthy as you can. And I don't think they had a single defensive tackle returning behind Quinnen Williams. So like you just kind of needed to shore up your depth. And Kinlaw, he was with Robert Saleh in San Fran. So I think it's just kind of like a good swing for the upside pick as well. I like what they're doing so far.
Yep, familiarity there, prudent moves. It's what you want in free agency for sure. So we're through the first wave of free agency, still a long way to go, but we have enough to kind of recognize the NFL draft implications. So that's all we have for today. We're out of time, unfortunately, but thank you all, as always, for listening, tuning in. We will be back for every week leading up to the NFL draft with more free agency, NFL draft, scouting, pro day, whatever, a ton of takeaways to go over. Until next time, thank you, everyone. Peace out.